We never know where life will lead us or what may hinder us along the way. But while every day can feel like one big question mark, it doesn't have to. With the right insights, strategies, and solutions from Western and Southern Financial Group, together we can look ahead to leave the unknown behind.
What's pro football focus doing? Last week they had Brady. This week they got Brady.
We're literally doing it differently from everybody else.
As a matter of fact, moving forward from this point on, I will not make reference to PFF.
Ready to get into it?
Yeah.
All right. We're going team by team.
I would be very careful about slinging stone.
Am I going to get sued?
We got legal on this?
I like football season and all the things that go with it.
Welcome into the PFF NFL podcast. Steve Palazzolo, Sam Monson. We're here together again.
You're back.
I am.
Uh-huh.
Back from Florida, back from Disney World. And it's time to talk. This is like the offseason kickoff for real here. When we start talking about team needs, we're talking NFC team needs here today.
Yeah. So NFC team needs today. We've got a whole week of Super Bowl content. We're going to be at Radio Row, Phoenix, during the whole week. And going to have all kinds of special guests. Going to have who knows what we're going to be putting together over the course of this week.
Yeah, it's a little, it's going to be open-ended. It's going to be crazy. But, full disclosure, because we don't lie to people here. We're live right now on YouTube. We're live. Mm-hmm. Maybe on Sunday night. Mm-hmm. Maybe recording on Sunday night, but we're live on YouTube right now. You and I are probably in the air right now.
Yeah.
God willing. We're in the air on the way to Arizona.
Joe Rogan used to do those, podcasts on a plane things where you just like plop an iPhone down next to somebody and they just start talking.
Really?
We could do that tomorrow.
We could.
Yeah.
Yeah, except I usually...
Except you'll be off in a bulkhead seat somewhere, and I'll be back with the cattle in the back.
If we could get you into the exit row with me, then that would be great.
And we could do podcasts on a plane.
We'll just do some 10-minute hits on a plane. We'll see. We got a fun week. We'll do some team needs here. We'll do another team needs episode at some point, and then all sorts of interviews. And who like you said, who knows? See how it goes. How was it without me?
It was all right.
Just
we
all
survived.
Right. Yeah.
We got through.
Shout out to Seth. Appreciate him coming in from Canada and filling in nicely.
We still need a couple more donations to the charity drive to get us over our goal so that you can play rugby. I'm excited about what this is going to look like. We've got professional players sending us video footage. We've got, I think, a sort of uniform sponsor, I guess.
Awesome.
We're going to be decked out.
Wow, this is great.
And stuff. Solve seems very confident that he can get us, an actual stadium to do this. So you put all those things together, it's some TV magic right there.
Well, let's finish up. Let's get the last few donations going and get this thing. I'm ready to play some rugby. I'm ready to rugby, as you would tell me.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into the stuff here. NFC team needs. You have an article that's a good guide for us over at PFF.com. You focused on the top need for all 32 teams, but we'll try to hit this high level. We'll go team by team. NFC today. We'll start with the NFC East, and who knows what order I'll go in. But we'll start with the NFC East. That good, Mike? All right, cool. Let's do it. Dallas Cowboys are up first. We've got a season where everybody's upset. They only lost in the divisional round here. And Mike McCarthy says he's calling plays. Brian Schottenheimer's coming in to be the offensive coordinator in title. And it's time to talk what the Cowboys need, and it might be the same need that they had last year. It didn't seem like their wide receiver core was terrible, but losing Amari Cooper, it pushed everybody up a peg. So you put wide receiver 2 in particular as the top need for the Cowboys.
It pushed everybody up a peg, and Michael Gallup was coming back off that significant injury and wasn't the same guy, at least in year one. Now, maybe if Gallup comes back year 2 and looks like, himself again, then this, I think, it doesn't evaporate, but it becomes an awful lot less significant. Like, they can get by a lot more with that scenario. But if Gallup is just sort of not the same guy again, they missed Amari Cooper hugely. Like, there was a reason that we were being inundated with OBJ to Dallas rumors for the last month and a half of the season or whatever it was. They needed that kind of influx. And T.Y. Hilton sort of added a little bit of a spark late on, but it just wasn't enough. Like, they need another guy that can come in and take some of the pressure away from CeeDee Lamb.
So when we look at the needs, and if you guys have listened to our shows in the past, we talk a lot about the pass game and, receivers and corners as needs, even when it doesn't seem like it on paper. We don't completely neglect running backs, but clearly those are lesser needs, we would say. I think whether or not Michael Gallup is healthy, though, this is a place they need to attack. Now, how you attack it is less clear than in past years. I think the free agent class is extremely weak at most positions, but at receiver, we're talking about Jacoby Myers as the top option right now, coming out of the New England Patriots, Juju Smith-Schuster as the second receiver on our board here, Odell Beckham Jr. Now, if he comes back and he's healthy, I could understand him, maybe being the top receiver available, but there's a big question mark there with injury. So filling, one of my themes this offseason is going to be teams getting creative, right? It's not as simple as go to the free agent market. I think the draft is kind of all over the place when it comes to receivers in particular. Is there some creativity that Dallas can tap into here to try to get that next player in here?
Yeah, it's one of the worst free agent groups I can remember for a long, long time. And I don't know if that's just, a trend of the NFL, that this is going to be weak free agent groups, teams are getting better with dealing with that, blah, 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 or if this is just a bad year. But maybe you're going to see, like last year, where all the movement was trading. We were trading for receivers rather than signing them in free agency. Maybe we see a repeat of that. Maybe that's the way the league is going to go, that teams are going to start focusing more on trades than they are in real letting free agents hit the open market.
I think the offensive line came together all right for Dallas. We look at Dalton Schultz as a free agent here, and so they have to figure something out at tight end. Defensively, a few starters are going to hit the market. Leighton Vander Esch, Anthony Brown at corner. Vander Esch, of course, is a linebacker. They could always use some depth along the defensive line, but I agree with what you're saying. The biggest need for the Dallas Cowboys being the number 2 wide receiver spot opposite CeeDee Lamb.
Yeah, it's another situation, a lot like last year, where Dallas is running into free agency, and when you look at the list of guys they have from their own team that are scheduled to leave, it's quite extensive, and they're quite important players in various spots. So
Tony Pollard, one of them as well. I mean, they have to. I mean, running back's going to be a need, right? We saw Zeke.
Well, certainly,
Zeke
if Pollard
could barely
isn't
average
there.
2 yards per catch. Right. It's a need.
It's not a need as long as Pollard is there, and you're like, well, look, just stop giving Zeke Elliott the carries and give it to Tony Pollard instead. But if Pollard leaves, or again, if he's not 100% coming off an injury, then it's back to just Zeke trudging along trying to get any kind of production. But my point being, for the second year in a row, it's like Dallas have been surprised by free agency, by their own players' contracts coming due. Like last year, the Amari Cooper thing felt like a shock. It's like, oh, we're not prepared for Amari Cooper to be earning $20 million a year. We got to get rid of him. Whereas now it's like we're not prepared for 3 or 4 key players to be hitting free agency. We actually need most of those guys. So they're going to have the work cut out again to try and bring them back.
All right, let's go on to the New York Giants. Staying in the NFC East here, the Giants, you put in the article, interior offensive line as their biggest need. It's an interesting situation in New York, a team that made the playoffs. They win a playoff game, but they were still kind of rebuilding though, right? Like it was year one of what was supposed to be a rebuild. So you went with interior of the offensive line for the Giants.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of places you could add talent and be fine, but that offensive line was an absolute mess pretty much all season long. Andrew Thomas is great at left tackle. Evan Neal was a top draft pick, first round pick a year ago. Evan Neal really struggled last season, but so did Andrew Thomas year one. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's how it works for every offensive tackle, that year one they're terrible, year two they're a bit better, year three they're great. There's a pathway for Evan Neal to get better. We saw it on the other side of the line. Andrew Thomas did it year after year, or Evan Neal might just be bad. But either way, he's going to get another year to figure it out, whereas the interior trio was just a weakness all the way through the season.
Sometimes there's a disconnect, right? Because the on-field product for the Giants was solid offensively. I think a big part of that was Daniel Jones as a runner. We talk about the hidden yards and various things like that a running quarterback is able to essentially account for. Daniel Jones was one of those guys, like a top 3 or 4 impactful runner at the quarterback position. And I think it did mask, that stat that the graphic that we had up with 114 pressures allowed along the interior of the offensive line. And you have games where Saquon Barkley had some big runs at the end and all that stuff. So when you're watching the Giants, it doesn't feel like the offensive line is an issue all the time, but it kind of was, right? There was pressure, and they're not the best run blocking unit. And even though I think Evan Neal's going to be fine, I like their tackles, both with Nick Gates hitting free agency and just uncertainty elsewhere. It does make a lot of sense here.
And the line got worse when they had to go into the bench. Like,
right.
The starting trio wasn't good, but then the backups were terrible. So you could argue the line isn't as bad as it looked all the way through the year, but it's still pretty bad.
Of course, my answer would be receiver. And the Giants didn't make a ton of sense, right? Because every place where they had invested in receiver, they were getting nothing in return. First rounder for Kadarius Toney, they flipped him off to Kansas City. Flipped him off? Sent him off to Kansas. Look, sometimes you're rusty coming out of vacation. I'm exhausted coming back from Disney vacation, by the way.
Disney's not a holiday.
Oh, not for,
Disney's
obviously for the kids. And we were like, the kids too, we were like, sorry kids, you're up till 1, we got to get up at 6, we got to get to the park. You don't get to sleep here. So, cry it out. We're going to have some fun. So
have fun whether you like it or not.
So bear with me here. Can't wait for the Super Bowl week where I could sleep in.
Right.
And but I would have said receiver, right? Even though they invested in Kadarius Toney and invested in Kenny Golladay and still had a lot of success with guys like Isaiah Hodgins stepping up and Richie James stepping up and Darius Slayton. Well, James and Slayton are both free agents, and I would have said receiver, much like Dallas, just overall. But I like interior offensive line, receiver. I'm very fascinated to see what Brian Daboll does in year 2. You could also say quarterback since they don't, have one under contract that's a starter.
But I think you have to assume that they're bringing back Daniel Jones in some capacity. They can definitely use receiver help, obviously, but I think they patched it up well enough last season that you can kind of say, all right, even if they don't do anything other than keep what they have, maybe draft a receiver, even not in the first round, they're probably okay. Like Wan'Dale Robinson, the draft pick from a year ago, and he played in like 6 games or whatever. So I can see a world where that receiver group is fine, even if they don't do anything crazy to address it, whereas the offensive line is a catastrophe if they don't.
The PFF NFL podcast is sponsored by Western and Southern Financial Group. While you focus on your roster moves, Western and Southern helps advance your money moves. Buying your first home, planning to start a family, wondering how to make your money grow? Well, Western and Southern's playbook of life insurance, investment, and retirement solutions helps you rest assured on game day. Team up to understand needs and address goals with a game plan built just for you. Get started at westernsouthern.com/PFF. All right, so you did one for the Philadelphia Eagles. They're playing in the Super Bowl, of course, this week. But they're next up here as far as offseason team needs. And you went with cornerback depth for the Eagles. And since I do repeat myself over and over and over again, I love the fact that the Eagles, their biggest weakness or their biggest holes are some of the players that they got on the cheap. Guys like James Bradbury. Can the Eagles get creative again, at places like cornerback this offseason?
Yeah, it's really just reloading again. Like, they signed James Bradbury for pennies on the dollar. He's been one of the better corners in the league this year in a really good defense. Presumably, he's going to be wanting a big-time contract off the back of that. I would also imagine they're not too enthused with the idea of giving him one. So maybe they pay it and they say, he was worth it. It's a reward. If they win the Super Bowl, sometimes you're a little bit inclined to give out those kinds of contracts, but maybe they do that. But if they don't, there's just as good a chance that they'll pick up a James Bradbury again this year, like a cap casualty, a guy that ends up getting cut because the team doesn't want to pay him $9 million or whatever, and then the Eagles can pounce get him again for pennies on the dollar. So really they just need to find a way of kind of reloading at those positions that were short-term moves for them a year ago and, now are coming up, are expiring.
Yeah, we see a guy like James Bradbury, and part of the what made that move so good was a guy like Bradbury was coming off of a down year after previous really good seasons, right? So you get him when the cost is low. The Giants did have to make him a cap casualty. They did all of this after the draft, so they didn't have to lose a comp pick, right? So they just get the year of service time pretty much on the cheap for Bradbury, and now he's probably going to walk in free agency and maybe bring that comp pick back to the Eagles. It is just a really good way of doing business, but it still leaves a hole on the depth chart going into next year, just like there was a hole on the depth chart last year at this time for the Eagles. So I am fascinated to see if they keep that same patient approach, and it's not always going to be the same thing every year. Like, let's find the next cornerback that's, a buy low candidate, and we'll sign him after he gets cut after the draft. You can't always repeat the same strategy, but the Eagles have some work to do with Bradbury. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson was more of a safety for them, but he's a guy that is flexible and can move around. He's going to be hitting free agency again as well. So when you do look at this Eagles team, there's a lot of free agents on the defensive side of the ball in general. Much of the offense is coming back, but it's going to, no matter what happens this Sunday in the Super Bowl with the Eagles, fascinating offseason as they have to probably make their Jalen Hurts decision as far as, when they want to pay him and how they want to distribute that money. And then how do they reload on the defensive side of the ball? We know that they always like to build in the trenches first. They have a whole bunch of, Javon Hargrave's one of our top free agents as well at defensive tackle. So they've got several starters that they need to lock up. But we also know that the Eagles have been really good when their secondary is really good. So that depth at cornerback, I think, makes sense as their biggest need.
And they're in that great spot of having 2 first-round picks.
Yeah, right. I mean, a team that, look, they've made all the right moves, man. And it felt like coming after they had their 2017 Super Bowl, and they tried to run it back a couple times. They had to move on from Carson Wentz. It felt like they were supposed to be reloading, and they just accelerated it in 2021 and accelerated it even further in 2022. So Darius Slay's still locked in over $16 million. He's got one more year in his contract heading into 23. That's the other thing to keep an eye on too, right? Not just cornerback depth to replace James Bradbury, but even beyond that, if Darius Slay has to walk at the end of 2023 as well. So cornerback depth for the Eagles. Don't forget, by the way, this offseason, we're going to have Fixing Your Team in 5 minutes, right, which is really 15 minutes. We'll get in depth on every single team this offseason. Let's go to the Washington Commanders to round out the NFC East. Their biggest need, Sam, QB.
Yeah. I'm not buying this idea that Sam Howell is the unquestioned starter after 7 minutes of football at the end of last season. No matter what they're telling offensive coordinator candidates, I'm just not buying it. I refuse to believe that a team would still act that way in 2023. So they need a quarterback.
I'm always the guy that's like, let's look deeper into the quote and stuff like that, and the Ron Rivera stuff that you were pushing back on all year. He's making his decisions off vibes, right, off of Taylor Honey, and I'm like, no, it can't just be that. There's something to it, right? And I'm trying to look into this, right?
Yeah.
Teams say this all the time. Like, Sam Howell's the only quarterback under contract, so they're like, of course he's our starter, right? But I don't see that as them declaring their offseason strategy. I don't think. Am I looking too much into that? Their offseason strategy isn't like, we're good. Not even going to evaluate this quarterback class because we have Sam Howell as our starter. Of course, Carson Wentz is also still under contract after making $32 million a year with 2 more years left on his contract. But I think there's more to the Commanders just saying, yeah, it's Sam Howell. I think they're going to also explore other options.
Yeah, well, they should. But, the reports were that they were informing offensive coordinator candidates that Sam Howell is the starter next year.
As of now.
Yeah, but, as of now, it would still need to jump him over Carson Wentz, and then you've still got the draft and free agency to come. Anyway, my point being, I don't think you can go into a season with Sam Howell as the unquestioned starter and nobody else that could challenge that on the depth chart.
Yeah, so we know there's a couple names that are supposed free agents. I say supposed free agents at quarterback because Lamar Jackson, technically, Geno Smith, technically.
Yeah, and/or cut candidates, trade candidates, all kinds of quarterback movement.
there are people out there. But the official free agents, Lamar Jackson, Geno Smith, Daniel Jones, Jimmy G, and Jacoby Brissett. With Carson Wentz making all that money, you have to figure out a way to get out from under that contract if you're going to get one of the bigger names that hit free agency. And also Lamar and Geno Smith probably don't hit free agency for long if there's franchise tags involved or whatever it might be. Do you get into the Derek Carr stuff? That deadline's in 10 days, man. We might have some Derek Carr news during Super Bowl week here.
Well, there was talk that they might cut him before the Pro Bowl because if he injured himself at the Pro Bowl, they'd be on the hook for the money.
Oh, man, that's so much to be. And there's a lot of heavy rumors with the Raiders and Aaron Rodgers. So, that's the other thing with Washington. They have been the epitome of QB purgatory. Even the year that they drafted Dwayne Haskins, they still took a shot on a first-round quarterback, but it was at number 15, right? It was after, a lot of teams didn't take Dwayne Haskins, right? He was a middle of the first round type of player.
I liked what they did right up until the Carson Wentz trade. Like, I actually thought they were doing a good job of, you took a swing in the draft, it didn't work out. You do what you do when you have a decent team, but not a quarterback. You bring in Ryan Fitzpatrick. He lasted like 40 snaps, so that didn't happen. Taylor Heineke had shown flashes. He had that game against Tom Brady in the playoffs. He just didn't pan out at all. And then it felt like they panicked and went, okay, quick, go get Carson Wentz. And that was just a disaster. So I like generally quite a lot of what they've done, but then this most recent move, a quarterback, felt completely panicked.
Any predictions as to which way they go? They're going to go with Sam Howell as the guy?
I don't see how you can do that. I really don't. I think they have to find some better viable option than that. They'll cut Carson Wentz.
Anthony Richardson or something in the draft, maybe?
I think they'll go veteran. I don't know that they'll draft one. So, they make a lot of sense for the sort of Derek Carr thing of, at least he's okay,
Yeah.
Let's shoot for okay. We're worse than that.
Remember a couple years ago we said, like, what if a team just goes, veteran QB by veteran QB all the way through? You get, Marcus Mariota and Phillip Rivers, and the Colts have kind of done that a little bit.
And Washington.
All the Wentz teams, right?
Yeah.
The Colts have done that, and Washington's done that. But because Carson Wentz he wasn't even like a massive failure with the Colts, but because they didn't make the playoff, because in Week 18 he was a massive failure, it felt like a big failure, and this feels like a big failure by Washington. How burnt do these teams feel and feel like they need to draft, I guess, is the question.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like I think Washington, again, because of winning it a bit this year as well, they feel like they just need something that's half decent, right? Wentz wasn't. Heineke wasn't. Sam Howell, sure, but we've seen like a ridiculously small sample size from him. So just plug somebody in here who will be fine. That's it. That's all I want. And that's Derek Carr.
All right, let's go to the NFC North, starting with the Chicago Bears. You said everything for the Chicago Bears. You don't give out everything to everybody.
No. And, people get very upset about that, because nobody wants to see that their team just stinks across the board. They're like, it's not everything. You're like, yeah, okay.
We don't need a left tackle. We had Braxton Jones.
Right. Maybe you've decided you don't need the quarterback, and maybe you don't need a tight end because Cole Kmet's fine. But you do pretty much need everything, right? You need defensive line help. You need linebacker help. You need secondary help. You need offensive line help. You need receiver help. I think, isn't Montgomery a free agent as well? You need running back help. Like, you do need everything. Maybe you don't need every single player, but you do pretty much need every position.
Cole Kmet's also heading into the last year of his contract. It's not like – when we talk about this stuff, we try to think about it from a multi-year view as well, which is why we kept criticizing the Texans for just getting, signing 1- and 2-year contracts. Of course the Bears need everything. They need help across the board. If you want to get specific, yeah, they need to be better along the offensive line. Did they find a potential steal in Braxton Jones in the 5th round out of Southern Utah last year? Absolutely. That's awesome. Got to upgrade along the offensive line because you can't just – they were pretty well protected in a run-first system. Receiver, of course, if you're going to roll with Justin Fields, we said before the season, are we going to know what Justin Fields is? Here's what we learned. I think, as he's a dynamic runner. We still don't know enough about him as a passer. Has he been held back as a passer because of his own passing skills or because he hasn't had the supporting cast to throw to? I'll say this. We might not see an offseason quite like what the Bears have as far as having the number 1 overall pick, having all of the money that they can spend in free agency, the ability with that number 1 pick to flip it for multiple picks or future picks or whatever they want to do. The Bears, when Ryan Poles came in, your phrase, like, strip it for parts, right? You trade Khalil Mack, you trade Robert Quinn along the way. They traded down in the draft a ton. That was the way to do it. They were left with no cap space and no draft capital, and they replenished both.
Yeah.
And now the rebuild starts this offseason. Everything is on the table for the Bears.
And it's why, it's not necessarily a negative. It's just the reality of the situation.
Of course.
Like, they did strip this roster down to nothing, which is why the whole narrative around Justin Fields was what it was. Like, does he have anything around him in order for him to even be evaluated this year? And then, okay, Justin Fields is showing some stuff, but he has no receivers to throw to. The offensive line has been a little bit better, but it still needs work. Like, they did strip it down. There's nothing there. Now, you think you've seen enough in Justin Fields to be the guy. Fine, go. But now you need to then deploy all of that capital, whether it's getting the trade haul for trading out of number one, using that salary cap space, although, on what is debatable given the free agent market. But the point being, now you actually need to build the thing back up again, because you did strip this entire roster down to bare bones, i.e. Justin Fields and a few randoms.
So the one move that right now doesn't look great is the Chase Claypool trade. It seemed like everything that Ryan Poles had done since joining the Bears was pretty much, all right, we're thinking of the future. And the one move, and it didn't seem ridiculous at the time because we didn't think that the Bears were going to pick number one overall. But now Chase Claypool for a second rounder, that's the 32nd overall pick, basically a first rounder. And even when it happened, we were like, so that you can get a look at Chase Claypool, right? You get a look at him for a year, but he's only under contract for a year and a half. So now you've got one more year of Chase Claypool. That doesn't look great. But everything else, as far as the ability to maneuver in the draft, to add impact players, and going back to last offseason when people, and you may have been saying, hey, they're not doing enough for Justin Fields here because their first two picks were defensive players. The long game of bringing in Kyler Gordon, who was up and down as a rookie at corner, Jaquan Brisker at safety, who was their most valuable defensive player this year, by the way, as a rookie safety. Okay, that's the long-term play. You added a couple pieces to the secondary. Now they need impact players everywhere. Defensive line, more players in the secondary. Clearly they need receivers. Offensive line help. David Montgomery at running back is a free agent. They need help everywhere. And whether it's with Justin Fields or without, right? If they are having that discussion about do we draft Bryce Young and trade Fields, whether or not they're having that, the rest of the roster does need to be attacked with all of these resources.
Yeah, and I think, to me, Justin Fields has done enough to earn the shot to show what he has with something around him. Like, it's very difficult to overstate how bad the situation around him was this year, and he still showed quite a lot. More as a runner, obviously, than a passer, but still showed what a dynamic playmaker he could be. Now give him receivers. Now give him defense. Now give him an offensive line that can be good, not just hold its head above water. Like, give him the things that he should have to prove what he can be. And then if he isn't capable of being more than this, then fine. Okay, you took a misstep, but I think you owe it to him at this point to show you what he can do with a real supporting cast around him.
When we get into some more of the specifics of what the Bears could do with, if they trade down, pick up a bunch of draft picks, we're going to talk a lot about this receiver class this offseason. Maybe it doesn't have the Jamar Chases of the world. It doesn't have the Justin Jeffersons, the elite players. And the other thing we tend to say a lot is, which flavor of receiver you're looking for. Do you want a big 6'4" Quentin Johnson? Do you want a Zay Flowers who's fast and quick? A Jackson Smith and Jigba who might be more of a slot receiver, but is just such a good route runner. There are all different styled receivers. I do wonder with what we know about Fields as a runner now, much like the Ravens kind of leaned into speed receivers, thinking, hey, we're going to run the ball a lot, QB run game, big plays off of that. You have Darnell Mooney on one side. Are we looking for speed receivers? Are we looking for your big play threats? A guy like a Jordan Addison out of USC, formerly of Pittsburgh, that can stretch the field. Because, again, we're not probably looking to free agency a ton for receiver needy teams this year. But drafting maybe one or two of those receivers, different styles, but at least somebody that can stretch the field, much like Mooney can. I think Cole Kmet, I think any tight end works well in this system because with all the misdirection and play action you're going to have with Fields, those tight ends are going to be open regardless. I want some big play receivers for the Bears.
Yeah, I just want anything added to that team.
Well done. Great. So Bears need everything. I think you nailed it. Let's go Detroit Lions here. And they finished strong, 9-8. You went with cornerback for their biggest need here.
Yep. I still think that's a problem area for them. Jeffrey Okudah was better this year, still wasn't great. None of the young guys really that they've added to that cornerback room recently have panned out. The pass rush, I think, worked its way out. The defensive line generally, Alim McNeil, started to show promise. Aiden Hutchinson through the second half of the season was looking like a fantastic player. James Houston came out of nowhere, was getting some real joy on the other side. I think that defensive line is going to be in good shape next year. They hit on a linebacker in the draft as well. Cornerback, though, is still a big problem spot.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And when we talked about the Lions and their rebuild, being so trench heavy, and then it did seem like last year, man, they improved that receiving core, right? Like last year was the year that they were going to start improving on the perimeter. And they, over the last 2 years with Amon-Ra St. Brown, drafting Jameson Williams last year. They brought in DJ Chark for the 1 year. He'll hit free agency, but the one spot that's still lacking is definitely corner. They have to make a 5th-year option decision on Jeffrey Okudah. Even with improvement last year, I don't know how you pick that up for a guy that was, 3rd overall, right? Mm-hmm. Huge money for Okudah if you pick that up. So, yeah, I mean, it's a year where they have to bring in probably 2 or 3 cornerbacks, I would say, in Detroit. And a lot of those other pieces that you had talked about, the investment in the defensive line, some of the draft picks last year that they hit on, and, late wins at, edge rusher with James Houston the 4th and all that stuff. I mean, they've added a lot of good talent in Detroit. The next piece, though, definitely has to be secondary, but in particular, cornerback.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're another team that could use wide receivers as well, but you have to assume that Jameson Williams will take some kind of step forward next year. And he barely played this season. It was like a redshirt year for him.
Right.
But even when they got him on the field late and he was getting like 10, 15 snaps a game, he didn't get an awful lot of production, but you could see just from watching him move around that he brings that just difference-making kind of speed. And, all right, they didn't turn that into much year 1, but I suspect they will year 2.
Yeah, I don't think they should be neglecting receiver. I still think there's more work to do, but I think we're in this. The offensive line's pretty well locked up for a few years now, like multi-year deals for everybody, essentially. The defensive line's had a lot of that draft investment. It's another year on the perimeter. It's another year of playmakers at receiver, playmakers at corner. But corner in particular, I think, does make the most sense for the Lions. Let's go to the Green Bay Packers. And you're going, well, so we'll see if quarterback, right? By the time you listen to this, I don't think Rodgers is getting traded. Is he getting traded this week?
Well, even if they trade him away, it's because Jordan Love is there. So quarterback, it's not going to be a need for them because they're going to be rolling with one of those 2 guys on the roster.
Well, you're going tight end here as the biggest need, though, for the Packers.
Yeah. I think the receivers, the young guys, showed enough last season to at least be confident in going forward. Maybe, I mean, obviously you can add a receiver to that, never stop adding playmakers, but I think tight end needs an unquestioned legit starter. They need a guy that can make an impact at that position. So Robert Tonyan saw 63 targets but averaged 1.3 yards per route run last season. He moved the chains 20 times in the entire year. That there's no reason they can't have an impact player at that position and take some of the pressure off, that wide receiver group that may be young or maybe limited or only have sort of specific skill sets. Let's take this in a different direction. We don't have to go first round wide receiver. We could get first round tight end.
Ooh, Michael Mayer from Notre Dame, maybe. I mean, Tonyan was a guy that was so productive just 2 years ago, 2020, I believe, when he was before he had gotten hurt. But he wasn't the catalyst, of course. It's like who's Big Bob Tonyan? Well, he's the guy that's open because you gotta focus on Devontae Adams and everything, right? And you didn't have that. You didn't have those receivers for most of the season opening things up for the tight end. So you're looking at this more like, hey, bring the catalyst that is going to take pressure off the other way, off of Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs and some of the younger guys. You have Alan Lazard, who's basically a glorified tight end as well. Big-bodied receiver. He's going to hit free agency. But specifically at the tight end position, Mercedes Lewis as well. You're what, 20 for Mercedes? Now he's almost 17 or 18. He's basically just an offensive tackle at this point. You have Josiah DeGuaro heading into his last year with the Packers. So there's a big hole there at that position, whether it's Aaron Rodgers or Jordan Love at quarterback. I mean, just pass catchers in general that are going to take some pressure off the QB makes sense here in Green Bay. Mm-hmm. All right, I lost my place. Who's next?
Minnesota.
Minnesota Vikings, of course. Where'd you go with the Vikings here?
Defensive tackle, interior defensive line. Now, they might need an edge rusher as well, depending on what happens with the 2 that they have, because the Vikings are one of those teams that plays the salary cap a little bit like the Saints. The credit card comes due at some point. You got to make some sacrifices to pay it off. Both Zadarius Smith and Danielle Hunter are on some pretty big money. Those 2 combined for 150-plus pressures last season. I don't know if either or both of them will be on the roster once we get around to the sharp edge of it. But whatever happens, they need an interior presence, which wasn't really there this year. Despite having those 2 guys, they didn't have this sort of interior wrecking machine, even though Dalvin Tomlinson had a pretty good year.
Yeah, I remember a couple of years ago they brought in Tomlinson. They kind of bulked up on the defensive interior, but this year, different system, and you're just not getting – they just haven't really gotten pressure from that position a ton. And that, it seemed like the secondary had their issues, and they certainly did. It just wasn't a good overall team defense for the Vikings. It was a whole bunch of individuals who performed okay in isolation, like Hunter and Zadarius Smith, but even when pressure was getting home, the coverage wasn't. It was one of those where just not all working in sync here. And when you look at the offense, a lot of that group is coming back right now, right? So you're talking about the defensive side is where most of the attention is going to go in Minnesota as it is. You mentioned the edge rushers. We'll see what happens there. Financially, both guys on contracts making over $14 million a year. But a penetrating interior defensive lineman, they're not the only team that's looking for those types of players, right? Those are the types of players that are available this offseason for the first time in a while around the NFL.
And nobody knows, by the way, what defense they're going to be running next year because they don't have a defense coordinator yet.
Yeah, that's true too. I mean, are they just 3-4 and 4-3 is outdated, but they were running 3-4 type of principles this year, right? How much of that is like, all right, let's go back to what we were. Mike Zimmer was as 4-3 as it gets, right? Like the types of players he was getting your classic hand in the dirt defensive ends, classic nose, your classic 3 technique. 3-4 defense kind of like blends those a little bit more. Are you going to go back to what Zimmer was doing, or does it just depend on whether the defensive coordinator search takes him?
Yeah, I mean, I think the defense top to bottom needs a lot of help. The defensive line, I think, probably needs the most, but the secondary needs a lot of help, but you assume that some of that is already there in young players that they drafted a year ago that didn't play for different reasons. Lewis Seen obviously broke his leg in that London horrific special teams play. Andrew Booth Jr. barely played either. So 2 guys that were supposed to sort of be the foundation of that secondary going forward, or at least the heirs apparent to the guys that have been there for a long time, really didn't feature at all. Now, does that mean they're not going to be factors going forward, or do we just have to wait a while before they make an impact? But like, they could provide reinforcements to the secondary. Eric Kendricks really didn't have a good year this year, but has been a good player in the past. Brian Asamoah, the linebacker, looked really good in limited snaps. Maybe he can come in, but either of those young guys need to step up, or they need impact additions at those positions.
We have four players in the top 40 who are interior defensive linemen on our draft board currently. And so so it's an interesting position this year in the draft. We haven't really had that group in a while. You mentioned Dalvin Tomlinson. He's a free agent this year, number 16 on our list overall for free agents, but 2 guys ahead of him, Daron Payne, Javon Hargrave. You have guys like Draymond Jones, Zach Allen. It's a solid group as far as like what availability in the market for that type of position around the NFL. It's better than it's been, I think, in a few years. We'll get to the NFC South in a minute here. But first, are you ready for the biggest Sunday in sports? DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of Super Bowl 57. They have all the Super Bowl action you need. New customers can bet just $5 and get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Plus, all customers can get in on the Super Bowl 57 excitement with DraftKings Happy Hour Super Boosts. Check the DraftKings Sportsbook app every day, 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern, to see what prop bet will be boosted. That's 6 to 9 Eastern every single day. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code PFF. New customers can bet $5 on Super Bowl 57 and get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Only at DraftKings Sportsbook with the code PFF. Minimum age and eligibility restrictions apply. Void in Ohio. See show notes for details. It will not be void once we get to Arizona. Are we good in Arizona once we get there? Are we no longer voided, Sam?
I don't know.
We'll find out. All right, let's go to the NFC South. The Atlanta Falcons, where I think you also went the Bears route here. Everything for the Atlanta Falcons.
Yeah, I felt like I haven't checked the copy, but I felt like I said everything on defense for the Falcons, and that's become everything, period, in the article.
Oh, the old editor blame.
As I said, I haven't checked the original. It might be my mistake.
That's you've been writing for over 10 years here.
But
PFF.
I certainly feel
it's
like
a veteran move.
Everything on defense.
Don't blame me. Blame my editor.
Yeah.
So let's say everything on defense here for the Atlanta Falcons. I'm just reading what's in the article that has your name to it.
I think the offense is actually in reasonable shape, other than quarterback. Which, okay, that's quite a large caveat. But the offensive line was in good shape. They're losing Caleb McGarry, presumably in free agency. The running backs did really well. Receivers were limited, but so was the offense. You know, it's they were the only team in the NFL to run more than they passed. They lost Kyle Pitts for a large part of the year. But I think generally the offense is okay. The defense, though, needs help everywhere.
The situation looks a lot like the Bears, right, as far as the non-quarterback roster for the Falcons, right? I mean, for multiple years, we see the EPA number there. For multiple years, the defense has lacked a pass rush, and they've struggled on the back end, coverage-wise. I mean, it hasn't been good, much like the Bears' defense. So I agree with you there. I thought last year they made little one-off moves like bringing in Casey Hayward Jr. It's the tail end of his career. He's still a solid corner. A.J. Terrell took a little bit of a step back this year, but that was like the only position coming in. You're like, all right, they could be okay at corner. We know Grady Jarrett is a game-wrecking type up front, but you can't do it by yourself. You know, edge rusher has been a multi-year issue for Atlanta. They've invested a ton in the draft through the years. I thought Arnold Ebiketie did a nice job as a rookie, and there's maybe more there, but that's it, man. They're in the middle of this rebuild. They're losing all the dead money from Matt Ryan's contract. So attack a whole bunch of resources on that side of the ball, the defense, everywhere.
Yeah. That's really where they need the help. Like A.J. Terrell didn't back up year one with a good year two. I think there's a few players there that could perform well if they had a lot more talent around them, but they just need to start adding players on defense that can actually make a difference.
Yeah, so I think that's pretty clear. Whether, they could use offensive help too, but I like what you're saying. The line, they went with Drake London at receiver. You still have Kyle Pitts. I mean, I'd like to see them use him a little bit more. And then I don't know what they're going to do at quarterback. Are they going to draft somebody? Are they going to go with Desmond Ridder? How much are teams going to learn from the Eagles or think that they can learn from the Eagles, who drafted Jalen Hurts when Carson Wentz was their guy? I mean, to a point, right? He'd been coming off a bad year, or a lesser season, and then it got worse after they drafted Jalen Hurts. But are teams going to say, hey, we got to keep drafting and finding guys? Or are they just going to say, hey, Desmond Ridder showed some good stuff, we're going to roll with him? Either way, I think the Falcons, should be investing at quarterback somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the learning for that would be, like, if they pick number 8, instead of drafting a quarterback at number 8, if they were able to do what the Eagles did and flip for, 2 first-round picks next year, move down a little bit, pick up in the first-round pick next year as well, and have 2 next year so that if the Desmond Ridder thing goes bad, now you can go after one of the top quarterbacks in the draft with your 2 first-round picks and all the ammo. That makes sense. Maybe they also, maybe they're a destination for a team or for a quarterback that's just going to be average, a Derek Carr. Like, they're in a weird world.
Average plus.
Yeah, but average to better than average. Most of the league is kind of going away from those guys, like the Raiders. But I think there are a couple of teams that really are desperate enough just for that baseline that he could have a market like that.
Well, that was the Falcons last year, right? They went with Marcus Mariota, and then, Carr's an upgrade from that, and then, I don't know where you go from there. But speaking of quarterback help, Carolina Panthers, also in the NFC South, their biggest need, still quarterback.
Yeah.
So, yeah, discuss.
I mean, it is.
Yeah. This season, you kind of liked their process for this season.
Yeah.
Right? You draft Matt Corral, bring in Baker Mayfield, see what he's got. Sam Darnold's already there. P.J. Walker's already there. Bunch of the season didn't make sense. Baker Mayfield was pretty bad. P.J. Walker was terrible. Then he was good. Then he was bad again. Sam Darnold came in. He was good. Then he was bad. Back to what he was. Panthers got to make some sort of impact here at quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, the Baker Mayfield thing going as badly as it did is kind of amazing when you consider sort of where his baseline was, albeit in better circumstances in Cleveland most of the time. He was significantly worse this year than he was last year when he had a torn shoulder. Like, that doesn't make any sense. So for them to sort of roll that dice and for it to backfire as badly as it did is pretty unlucky. To have Matt Corral also miss the entire year with a busted foot, also pretty unlucky. And then obviously Sam Darnold was the sort of what you were left with, along with P.J. Walker. It feels like they're going to go for a quarterback in the draft. Like, Frank Reich is your guy. Here's the chance for the hard reset. And we're positioned, number 9 in the draft. That it might get you one of the top 4 guys, or you're in position to sort of jump up for one of the ones that you like better than that.
Do you think 9 is just in that spot? Do you think the NFC South teams, now that Tom Brady's retired, the Panthers become, Aaron Rodgers potential here?
Yeah.
Might go that route.
I mean, any of those
every
teams.
team, no team is set, but Aaron Rodgers changed things, right?
Yeah, I mean, all 4 of those teams were within sight of the division up until the final week of the season, right? Like those 3 that didn't win it all finished 7-10. So, all 3 of those teams will be looking at this landscape in a post-Brady world and going, well, we can win this division right now. All we need is anything at quarterback.
Every team that needs a quarterback, we're just going to ask, is Aaron Rodgers a good fit? Carolina, the next 3, New Orleans, Tampa Bay, we're going to ask all the same question because this division, it was wide open with Brady in the division, because he was 45 and everything was getting worse there in Tampa Bay. So yeah, that could be. I'm just always curious how much you just kind of get sick of the purgatory, right? You get sick of it because that was what the Broncos did last offseason, right? The Broncos were the team. We're gonna sit here this whole offseason, Sam, and say, do you go QB to QB? Do you go veteran to veteran and all that stuff? And then the Broncos got sick of it. They were like, we're done with Case Keenum for a year and Joe Flacco for a year and Teddy Bridgewater for a year. We're going to get Russell Wilson. And it didn't work in year 1, but that was the move that they made. Even the Browns going to get Deshaun Watson. It's we're sick of the question mark. We think we're going to solve it with Deshaun Watson. Maybe they haven't. But at some point, teams get sick of it. They're sick of it in Indianapolis. They're sick of it. They're sick of the veterans. Mm-hmm. They're going to get the next guy. But I wonder if the Panthers are, after they did the Teddy thing, they did the Darnold thing and Baker Mayfield thing, are they at their tipping point where it's just trade it all for Aaron Rodgers? Let's go.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're always sick of it when it really doesn't work. But certainly, I mean, Carolina's thing, they've had a disaster for a few different spots at that quarterback position. They haven't really had a shot. Atlanta's, I mean, it kind of worked. Mariota was terrible, and they were still winning games, and then turned over to Ritter, who was, at least flashed the ability going forward. So I don't know that they would feel the need to do anything drastic to try and get themselves back on track. The Saints actually had Andy Dalton playing quite well, and everything else kind of didn't work as well. So maybe one of the 2 of those teams feels desperate, but I actually think at least Carolina will probably see this as being a good enough spot to take a quarterback in the draft. Atlanta, I think, might feel that they can tread water with Desmond Ritter or give him a shot, see what he has. The Saints, who knows what they'll do given their situation now with the first round pick from Denver coming back.
The draft positioning of the Panthers in Falcons is definitely interesting because we're talking about a top 4 or so quarterbacks, and are the Falcons at 8 or the Panthers at 9 teams that are going to be calling the Bears at number 1 so they can get their, what's the power move that a Falcons or Panthers team might make? Is it to go get number 1 and get your choice? Is it to, go the Aaron Rodgers or Derek Carr route? Both potential interesting spots just because they're at 8 and 9, right? They're not in that top 3 or 4 where they've got more of a choice, right, for their quarterback. Let's go to the New Orleans Saints. Even though we could talk quarterback for them as well, you're going defensive line for their biggest need with Marcus Davenport hitting free agency and Cameron Jordan, 34 years old now.
Yeah, and not coming off a particularly good year. In fact, generally the entire defensive line for the New Orleans Saints, I think, dramatically underachieved this year. It was a good unit for a while and felt like it should have been a real sort of strength of this team this season, and it really just wasn't. We were kind of waiting all year for this group to show up and play better, and it never really did. Davenport, when you consider that they traded 2 first-round picks to go up and get him in that classic Saints move, really hasn't worked out. Now, okay, it's not like he's been bad, and he's still only 26 years old, but he's got 1 year out of 5 where he's played over 500 snaps. That's also the only year of his career where he's added more than 50 pressures in a season. He's always been productive, but he's never been dominant. And given the kind of the situation now, a 26-year-old contract year, I don't know if you want to make that kind of monster payment to the guy. Cameron Jordan has been the guy for years, but isn't coming off a particularly good year. Peyton Turner, another he was first round, right? High
yes.
draft pick, hasn't shown much yet. David Onyemata, the interior guy, didn't have a good year relative to what he's done in the past. Like, the entire unit basically just underachieved, and I think they definitely need a kind of an injection of youth.
Saints fans are going to hear that you think Marcus Davenport failed or didn't work out or whatever and be like, what are you talking about? He's been really good. I mean, Saints fans have defended Marcus Davenport in that move for a while. I think the point there is if Marcus Davenport became Myles Garrett, which he has not become, or TJ Watt, if he's become TJ Watt, maybe you could justify that, right? Moving from the back end of the first up to number 14 and giving up multiple players. But we're talking about a guy who's, just from a PFF WAR standpoint, never ranked above 16th. That was his peak year in 2021. A couple of years ranking 26th. He's a top 32 type of edge. He's a top 25 type of edge defender. That's what he's been over the course of his career. Is that worth multiple players? And it's such a fascinating study in the whole potential aspect, right? Because he's 6'6", 260, incredible potential coming out of UTSA. And he did get better after year one, but he kind of leveled off as a very good player. But now as a free agent, he's one of the best free agents available. Is there something else to Marcus Davenport's game here as well? I love the whole Davenport potential discussion and evaluation here.
Yeah, I mean, he's a good player, but they traded 2 first-round picks to get him, and he doesn't play as much as a good player needs to play. Like, his career year for the Saints is basically the same as Von Miller's season this year for the Bills, except Von Miller did it in 11 games,
So his career high in snaps is 622. That was 2019. He's only broken 600 snaps one time in 5 years.
Yeah.
Because of, the rotation, injuries, whatever it might be. But yeah, you're talking about an edge defender usually is up 800 to 1,000 snaps plus as a starter. That's the other factor when it comes to Davenport and his value.
Where are you getting 600 from? I only see him breaking 500 once.
PFF IQ. Huh. I mean, it could be that's including special teams. That's why.
There you go.
Oh,
see?
that's in the works. That's in the works. As the product manager here, I've got the special team snaps being extracted soon because it's screwing me up because that was the page I was on.
Yeah.
You're right. Give me a better number here.
533 is his career high.
Well, there you go.
And he's only broken 500 once.
You've
but
got
the point
better
being,
numbers than me.
This year, this most recent season, Von Miller had 480-something snaps, I think, and had like 45 pressure. Like, he's had the kind of season that Davenport has at his best, only it took him 11 games to do that, whereas Davenport does that over the course of a 17-game now schedule. And it's like, if I'm going to, whether it's 2 first-round picks or whether it's the contract he's going to have to get now to keep him around or to move somewhere else, you need more than that from him.
So regardless of what happens here, we're talking about the Saints needing help on the defensive line. They've always had these big, long, strong guys like Davenport, Jordan, Carl Granderson, Peyton Turner. Peyton Turner's merely showed flashes as a first-rounder heading into year 3 now. So they need help on the defensive line, which is why that was their biggest need for you in your article over at PFF.com. Let's round it out with the Tampa Bay Bucs here in the NFC South, which, of course, with Tom Brady now retiring, it is quarterback.
Yeah, easy one. I mean, Kyle Trask, I guess from a process standpoint, was drafted to be the heir apparent to Tom Brady and sit behind him, learn for a couple of years, only there's been almost no evidence whatsoever that Kyle Trask has learned anything from that or is ready to take a step up and be the heir apparent. Like, anytime they've been in a position where somebody has got to come off the bench for Tom Brady, it's not been Trask. So I don't think that he's in their sort of future plans from that standpoint. Blaine Gabbert sure as hell isn't. So the Bucs need a quarterback.
Yeah, they've been linked to Derek Carr a bunch. I mean, we're going to say the same stuff. It just sounded like they were going to get into the Aaron Rodgers sweepstakes. That's been the game that the Bucs have played, right? We've got a good roster. You add Tom Brady, all of a sudden you're a Super Bowl contender, you're a Super Bowl champion. So can they do it with Rodgers? Talk for 1 second before I choke on these.
Well, I'll give you, not only while I talk, I will give you an interesting tidbit, statistical freak thing from Rob. I should really learn that guy's name. Maddie, whatever, MAADDI, which is a confusing string of letters. The last 9
I just saw this,
Associated Press NFL MVPs to play in the Super Bowl that season are 0-9. Yeah. 2001, Kurt Warner. 2002, Rich Gannon. 05, Sean Alexander. Tom Brady in 07. Manning twice in 09 and 13.
Peyton, not Eli.
Yes. Cam Newton in 2015, Matt Ryan 2016, and Tom Brady again in 2017. And, of course, the presumptive, almost certain MVP is about to be Patrick Mahomes.
Yes, this is the now infamous MVP curse, right? You can't win both in the same year. Can Patrick Mahomes? Likely Patrick Mahomes will have the opportunity.
Yeah, he had 49, I think, All-Pro, first team
I don't
All-Pro
think Jalen
votes.
Hurts is going to be the MVP.
No.
Although he'll have some votes in there. So, yeah, an interesting number there. Yeah, the Bucs, how do the Bucs play this? I like what you said from like a process standpoint. Bringing in Kyle Trask at the back end of the second round made sense, right? Just developmental quarterback, Tom Brady. We don't know when he's going to be done. Let's see what happens here. Trask, not only could Trask not leapfrog Blaine Gabbert on the depth chart, but even in the preseason, in his limited regular season time in the last week of the season this year, just doesn't look like he's ready, right, at all. So do the Bucs look at this the same way the Panthers or the Falcons? Division's wide open, right? Like they could win the division with Derek Carr as quarterback, and they could certainly be a Super Bowl contender with Aaron Rodgers as quarterback, even though they've got more holes now maybe than they did in recent years in Tampa Bay.
Yeah, unlike all of the other teams, because they won that that extra game and got themselves into the playoffs, they're picking like 10 spots lower down in the draft, which doesn't help them in their pursuit for a quarterback. So in a division where the entire division needs a quarterback, 3 of those teams are picking two of them are picking 8 and 9. The Saints are picking way lower because their first round trading. And then Tampa Bay is picking 19. So half the division essentially is picking 10 spots higher and also needs a quarterback.
Yeah, it's really going to be fascinating to see what the Bucs, like where they land here, right? Because they're on the lower end of effective cap space, like much like the Saints. What do you look at here? Do you look at the opportunity in the division, or your chance to reset? Just say, look, we pushed things down the road for Brady. We made our run. We had 2 great years. We still wanted to fit whatever, but you had 2 great years, a Super Bowl. That's what you got out of it. Now you pay your credit card, right? Is that what the Bucs do? Go the draft route instead of, Derek Carr makes them worse than they were last year, and they still were an 8 and 9 team, right? But at the same time, you can say, hey, we got Mike Evans and we got Godwin, and you got enough pieces back to make a move here. That's going to be interesting how the Bucs evaluate themselves, and if they say, hey, we're going to go the Rodgers Carr route or try to reset the whole thing.
Yeah, I also wonder, how much time everybody in that organization thinks they have for a sort of a lean year. Like, hey, things were great when we won the Super Bowl with Tom Brady, but now we're going to have to go through some austerity here. It's going to be a bad season, right? There's no way around that. You're going to have to deal with it. Like, does everybody there think that they have that kind of credit in the bank after what they've done?
Well, as I'm looking around the league, right, and we're like, all right, how do the teams that really need receivers, how do the Cowboys make a splash move or whatever it is? And you say, oh, you got to trade, right? And Tyreek Hill and A.J. Brown and Devontae Adams were all traded last year. Do the Bucs become sellers of Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and some of their big-name players? It might be a golden opportunity for them to take, Evans is, on the wrong side of 30 and all that stuff, still a good player. You have some attractive pieces if you do want to completely reset it. But the thing that holds you back is like, man, we could sign Derek Carr tomorrow and still win the NFC South, because I don't know if the Falcons, Panthers, or Saints are there yet. So, yeah, it's going to be an interesting spot for the Bucs. But I think the fire sale idea, the complete reset, build into the future, I think they've bought him. I think, has Jason Light bought himself enough time for that? I think so. They won a Super Bowl in Tampa Bay. It's like, Tom Brady retired. We got to move on. Of course you can do that. So last year at this time, we were talking about that with the Bucs.
You're right, because he was retired again.
Yeah.
You think he's done this time for good?
Yeah, I think
he's come back.
Yeah.
March the 12th, 13th, whenever it was, 40 days.
You can't spend another 40 days in the wilderness.
No?
That's it.
Who's got nothing to do now? Family somewhere else.
He's like getting ready for his first Fox broadcast. Oh, I can't do that. He can't really do the Fox broadcast.
Are they going to throw him right in the Super Bowl?
Yeah.
Sideline guy?
That's what I was, yeah.
Maybe they can have like a special role.
Hi, guys. Tom Brady here on the sideline reporting on the Philadelphia Eagles. This Jalen Hurts is really good at QB sneaks. I know a thing or two about QB sneaks.
I just saw somebody throw an iPad. I wouldn't do that.
No. Guys, I used to play. I don't know if you heard. He'll be the guy that just relates to his career all the time. Because he's done everything, except for scrambles.
Like, if they're going to use him, they have to have some sort of creative role.
They're not using him in the Super Bowl.
Why not? He's not working.
They're not.
He's not busy.
Oh, dude. He's like.
By the way, also,
he'd be like Kyle Trask taking over for Tom Brady at quarterback.
The funny thing about that is everyone was sort of like, oh, well, now he's retired. Maybe he can show up at the Super Bowl for Fox. It's like, well, okay, but he wasn't busy anyway. Like he was. It's not like he was working during the Super Bowl, before he retired.
True.
Maybe you could have found a way to get him on the broadcast anyway. I don't really see how it changes anything. Like either way, his ass is sitting on a beach.
There's like no way he'll be better than Greg Olsen. That's just
doesn't need to. Like Greg Olsen's legit.
All right, we'll get into the NFC West in a second here, but first, the easiest way to get in on the action for the big game is Underdog Fantasy and their pick'em game. Just pick higher or lower on your favorite Chiefs or Eagles stats for the big game. And if you get all your picks right, you can win up to 20 times your money in a single night. Underdog keeps it super simple with their easy-to-use website and app, and they're making it easier with a special pick for the big game. Here we go. Starting on Thursday, February 9th at 10 a.m. Eastern, you'll be able to make a special pick on Jalen Hurts, higher or lower than 0.5 total yards. What? 0.5 total yards. That's right. That's 0.5 yards. He literally needs 1 yard in the game in order to go higher. So pair this with at least one other correct picks. That's a max $20 entry. And you could be taking home some cold, hard cash. So that's this Thursday, February 9th, 10 a.m. Eastern. Again, visit UnderdogFantasy.com or find them in the App Store. And don't forget to register with promo code PFF. You get your first deposit doubled up to $100. You must be 18 plus and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-522-4700 or visit www.ncpgambling.org.
Are you conceptually a fan or otherwise of the constant run of just rebooted movies and franchises and TV shows that the world is experiencing right now?
Because I'm old with children and don't have the time for the reboots, I don't really care.
Because I believe I may have found a line that we should not be crossing.
What's that?
White Men Can't Jump is about to be rebooted.
Oh, they're rebooting. They really are rebooting everything, huh?
That's one. No, don't do that. Stop.
Happy Days. You know Happy Days?
Yeah.
I don't know what makes it across the pond with you guys. Like Happy Days did a reboot or something like that, and that was like our parents were like, oh, this is great. Like we're in that world right now where people are trying to appeal to our childhood.
You just can't. You can't screw with the perfection that was Woody Harrelson and Wesley Snipes. You can't do that. No.
Is it both of them again? What are the reboots? Is it all the same people?
I'm looking at the trailer, and
it's like they're kids.
They don't feature in it, so I don't know what it is.
It's like their grandkids.
There's two basketball players. One's white, one's black. That's as far as this reboot shows me.
Well, that's a good starting point, at least.
I mean, it certainly tallies with the previous one, but I think that's.
I thought like Dumb and Dumber was like just the best comedy of all time. But every other iteration, they did the and the prequel one and all. Just can't do it.
No, we shouldn't be messing with White Men Can't Jump.
No.
We shouldn't be doing it.
I'm with you.
Good.
What we can mess with is the NFC West.
Okay.
Arizona Cardinals. And we're going with pass rush here as their biggest need.
Yeah, another team that needs quite a lot, and they're in a tough situation because of the they don't have a coach, and also because Kyler Murray got hurt so late in the year. So who knows how long they're without a viable quarterback for. But
you still have Kyler
right,
Murray. Yeah.
and whatever about how long that's going to take to work out. Like you don't have any pass rush right now, pretty much. Marcus Golden is fine. But J.J. Watt was their best pass rusher. Even he was an interior guy. They need somebody on the edge. They need like a legit edge rusher.
Yeah, that makes sense. Zach Allen did have a nice breakout season as he hits free agency. The Barbarian's back.
The Barbarian.
Right? They still have the Barbarian, Dennis Gardeck. They made the second and third, 2 third-round draft picks last year, Cameron Thomas and Myjai Sanders. Mm-hmm. Didn't see a ton from either guy, though. But, Arizona's defense was similar. They were similar to the Bears and they were just a bad defense last year that did get some – they did create some big plays, right? They had some turnovers. They had some defensive touchdowns. But, yeah, they definitely lacked as far as impact players go on that side of the ball, particularly at pass rush. And you're talking about a team that's invested a ton in linebackers the last couple of years, right? A lot of teams do usually spend their first-round picks on defensive line if they're going to go to the defensive side of the ball, or maybe corner. We have Zaven Collins. We have the Isaiah Simmons who's
playing slot corner,
kind of slot corner, whatever. Ish. But they've invested in linebackers in recent years. So, yeah, pass rush makes a lot of sense, I think, for
a lot like the Vikings. Like, I think they could use players throughout that defense. You assume that they're not going to go and completely bump Zaven Collins or Isaiah Simmons out of the lineup, even though they've changed sort of power structures within that organization, and they're not necessarily as wedded to those guys as they were when they drafted them. Still, I think Isaiah Simmons in particular actually looks way better in this sort of slot hybrid role DB thing than he did as a linebacker. Like, that's what he was doing in college. And again, I think generally there's a much stronger connection when you take these guys that are doing a certain thing in college and kind of ask them to do the same thing in the NFL. Like, it stands to reason they would be better at doing that than they are doing something completely different. So Simmons might actually be on his way to a sort of career resurgence in this new role if that continues. Zaven Collins, I still think, flashes the ability to be an impact linebacker, but he probably needs the front line in front of him to be better and maybe the back end to be better as well.
So you went with pass rush for the Cardinals. We have to give an honorable mention to the offensive line, though. As far as returning starters, you have DJ Humphries at left tackle, coming off of injury. Rodney Hudson at center. He's coming off of he just hasn't been as good in recent years after being one of the elite centers in the NFL.
Very old at this point.
Yes, very old at this point. Justin Pugh, Will Hernandez was on a one-year deal there. Kelvin Beachum, those guys are all hitting free agency. Max Garcia, all of their depth pieces hitting free agency. The one interesting guy you kept mentioning was Josh Jones, who finally got to play tackle, where he played tackle in Houston in college and was pretty good there. Has not been good at guard. So you've got basically this is what you have, 2 left tackles and a center who's almost 40. I mean, what is Hudson really?
He's not that old.
I'm just kidding. He's
guess 35.
He's 33. That's old for a center. He'll be 30. He'll be 34 by the time the season rolls around, which is basically 40 in center years.
Yeah, I mean, their problem with the left tackle thing is that Humphries he signed his deal relatively last year. So I think, they're not going to cut him because it costs too much money. Maybe they can trade him away, and it's a bargaining chip. But Josh Jones, I think, showed that he could be their starting left tackle last year.
Jones could be actually a good, trading piece.
But I don't think you're getting as much because he's young and cheap, and he's going to be due a contract soon.
He is. If I was a team that needed a left tackle, I might call about Josh Jones just to try to steal. You get him for a year, you might have to re-sign him and the whole thing. I might want to steal Josh Jones, though.
But if I'm Arizona, I'd be trying to move Humphries because he's on the big contract. And
it's harder to move, though.
But consequently, you get cheaper if you get rid of him.
I'll tell you a team that could use any offensive line help. That's the Los Angeles Rams. Look at these segues here, Sam. The Rams' offensive line is their biggest need per Sam Monson over at PFF.com.
Per Sam Monson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Explain. Pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah.
They were bad.
Their season went so bad that it's kind of difficult to sort of turn back the clock and remember when things were just starting to go bad, right? But right at the start, remember week 1, opening weekend, right? Buffalo against Los Angeles, the defending Super Bowl champions against the team that everybody thought was the favorites for the Super Bowl. It was as good as an opening as you could get. And the Los Angeles offensive line got its shit wrecked by Buffalo's pass rush. And you're like, oh, that's going to be a problem. Then Buffalo's pass rush sort of faded as the year wore on, and particularly when Von Miller went down. But the Rams' offensive line didn't get much better. It bounced back a little bit for the next couple of weeks, and then it just sort of fell to rack and ruin as the season went on. It was 4 bad players and Rob Havenstein. That can't fly the next season.
It is amazing that there's just been those couple years. I know the Rams had way more issues than just the offensive line this year because everyone else got hurt as well. But 2019, the line fell apart, including Havenstein, who's been just incredibly consistent outside of one season. And then this year, the line just completely fell apart. So Joseph Noteboom got hurt. Joe's coming back, trying to replace Andrew Whitworth. We still don't really know if he's good enough. He got wrecked against good competition, against lesser competition. He was okay. David Edwards will hit free agency. A couple other backups will hit free agency. So you have players who weren't great and players that are leaving, and they just need to invest in the line. So it feels like one of those years where maybe they dabble in free agency a little bit, draft some players, but I think they know. I mean, look, if they stay healthy offensively, they can figure it out with Cooper Kupp, obviously, as the lead guy, but Allen Robinson, you know, maybe get him in the mix a little bit better in year 2 here. But boy, if they go into the season with, you know, offensive line issues again, the whole season can get derailed. So they're going to attack it this offseason. That's their biggest need.
Yeah, I mean, they're an intriguing situation because of this whole approach to roster construction that they've had, the stars and scrubs thing that we talked about. It needs the stars all firing. So immediately you've got the question of, well, is Aaron Donald even going to be there again? If he isn't, that's arguably the best player in the entire NFL is no longer on the team. That's a pretty big problem. 2 of your stars that need to fire are Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp. In order to do that, they need an offensive line that's at least pretty decent. So for 2 of those stars to function, the scrubs need to assemble an offensive line that can be pretty good, which is not, you know, the easiest achievement in the world necessarily. So they're in this sort of weird spot where when you look last year, the year we just had, this current year, generally speaking, the stars still kind of fired. Like, their best players on defense were still Aaron Donald, was still Jalen Ramsey, was Bobby Wagner who came over. It just didn't matter because everything else fell apart. So it's actually the kind of scrubs element of this that needs to get back on track. The stars kind of did what they were supposed to. Obviously, Matthew Stafford went down, and from that point on, the whole thing was obviously dead in the water. But they were, you know, taking on water way before that ever happened anyway.
You say scrubs with as an endearing term, of course.
Well, just as a, you know, it's
as a descriptor,
a broad brush descriptor of the people that aren't Aaron Donald.
It's not the problem with the strategy, the risk associated with the strategy, right? We know what the reward is. The reward is you win the Super Bowl in 2021 with Matthew Stafford. To me, no matter what anybody says, the strategy worked, right? Their aggressive strategy of getting the Jalen Ramseys and Matthew Staffords of the world in lieu of first round, Von Millers in lieu of top picks, worked because they have a Super Bowl. Then the risk associated with it is you go into the draft. Last year they didn't have a pick until pick 104, and they were the ones laughing about whether they were laughing at the Patriots or not. Cole Strange going in the first because they were looking at guys like Cole Strange who have to come in and fill an immediate need at pick 104. And Logan Bruss was their pick at 104. It's like, this dude's got to come in and play guard for us because that's our hole, right? And he doesn't even play a snap because he gets hurt. And then it all goes downhill. It got even worse from there. They just didn't have the depth to compete. And this year's draft allotment is similar. We have them with potentially 4 comp picks, 10 total picks, only 2 picks in the top 100. So there's still plenty of opportunities to pick players, but the lower you get in the draft, the hit rates go down. So they got to, hit on some of those picks. And that was part of their other, of the stars and scrub strategy is they found starting corners and safeties and stuff in linebackers rounds 3 through 7. That was part of it, right? And they didn't necessarily do that last year. They didn't get that immediate impact. So, yeah, offensive line I think is going to get plenty of love by the Rams this offseason. There's
an update to the MVP Super Bowl curse. This one's from our guy Josh Dubow from the AP as well. MVPs since the merger to lose the Super Bowl pre-1999. So you go back further, the curse extends.
Rob only went back to 2001. Yeah.
Brett Favre, 1997.
Lost
Thurman Thomas, 1991. Boomer Esiason,
lost to Washington.
1988. John Elway, 87. Niners. Dan Marino, Washington. 84. Joe Theismann,
Niners.
83. Kenny Anderson,
Raiders?
81. So the Bengals had the MVP both years they went.
49ers.
Larry Brown, 1972. That's
Dolphins.
Ends the list. Well, yeah, the Bengals had the MVP both years they went.
How about that?
In the 80s.
Kenny Anderson. Was that 81? Wasn't Chris telling us he had some ridiculous game where he had 1 completion week 1 or something? He was so bad in week 1 and then went on to win the MVP. He was good after that. Somebody look that up for us. Somebody in the live chat. We're live.
Yeah, that isn't here.
That's great. Are we moving on? We had 2 more teams to discuss here.
Sure.
We forgot the Titans again this week, but yeah, that's fine.
That's because the NFC.
San Francisco 49ers, biggest need for the Niners here, Sam.
They can go a few different places as well. I went interior defensive line simply because, in this world of what did you last see? The last thing I saw was Javon Kinlaw being put on roller skates and tossed out of the club by the Philadelphia Eagles offensive line. So from that perspective, I'm like, they need to make sure that doesn't happen again. But you could easily argue for, a couple of other positions in them as well.
We make a lot of statements here, like from a process standpoint, that was a good move, right? Remember the Niners move from a process standpoint. I raved about it. They traded.
You did. I didn't like it as much, though.
You didn't like it as much.
Because to me, this was was it the same year that happened as the Diggs-Jefferson trade, or was it a year later, or earlier, rather?
Diggs-Jefferson was the same year, 2020.
Okay, so 2 teams essentially did the same thing, right? And on the one hand, you got like it worked out as well as it could possibly work out for both sides. And on the other hand, you saw the reason that it's risky. So both teams, the selling team essentially tried to get rid of a player to get cheaper and use the pick that they got for that player on his replacement. And essentially, if you get it right, you got cheaper and you saved everything. You did well. So the Vikings ship off Stephon Diggs, who was getting unhappy. They get a hell of a lot cheaper, and arguably they get better, bringing in Justin Jefferson with their first-round pick. That's brilliant. It's great for the Bills, who traded a first-round pick for the certainty of Stephon Diggs, and it's great for the Vikings because they used that pick and they got a guy who's every bit as good as Diggs. The 49ers, well, they trade away DeForest Buckner. For the Colts, it's great. They pay a first-round pick for the certainty that DeForest Buckner will be really good. He has been really good for them. The 49ers use that first-round pick on a DeForest Buckner replacement, and he has been terrible so far. So Kinlaw just hasn't stepped into those shoes whatsoever. And this is why the buying team is willing to give you a first-round pick for a guy that comes with a big contract because of the certainty that he's good and the corresponding risk of not finding the good guy if they were to use the first-round pick.
Yeah, so well described for what happened. And now I'm going to say, so Kinlaw has been horrible. And what you mentioned, so the big need is the interior of the defensive line. Kinlaw, I love watching player development and all that stuff. He's a big 6'5", 6'6" defensive tackle. Sometimes those guys struggle with pad level and playing the run. DeForest Buckner. It is fascinating, by the way, that Justin Jefferson and Diggs are kind of similarly styled players, right? And Jefferson replaces Diggs. The Niners went with a similarly styled player as DeForest Buckner, a big, long defensive tackle with not nearly the same skills as Buckner. Right? Javon Kinlaw has really struggled. And in that Eagles game, I did make it a point to watch Kinlaw on the live broadcast, and he was getting moved by my favorite description of a defensive tackle that gets moved like a library ladder. Library ladder, he's sliding up and down. I mean, he's just getting owned by the Eagles' offensive line, and it was an issue. Now, I would still go back and defend the move itself for the Niners. I still think is probably the right one because I don't know they wouldn't have them. They were in a spot in their life cycle as a team, and particularly a defense, where they had to pay Eric Armstead, pay Fred Warner, eventually pay Nick Bosa. Right? They got to pay Nick Bosa now. They couldn't afford to have DeForest Buckner on the books for $20 million a year, and they right now, despite Javon Kinlaw, still have a really good defense. Now, it came back to bite last week or whatever, and you'd rather be better on the interior of the defensive line. The player itself didn't work out, but the process I still think is sound. They had the money to go get Travarius Ward at corner. They'll have the money to go get, to re-sign Nick Bosa for the big deal that they need to. So I still think the process is right with the Niners, but it's much better if Kinlaw ended up being a good player. And I think, Kinlaw struggled. Whoever you want to position, Eric Armstead, he's an interior, he's an edge, he plays both. Kevin Givens is the backup. I mean, they just need help there in general.
The only thing I don't like about it is using the pick, the primary pick that you're getting for that guy on the same position. Like essentially using the pick that you're getting to replace that guy like for like, because so many times it doesn't work out. And when it doesn't, it looks terrible. I like the concept of we bring this guy in, we play him through the entirety of his contract, then we move him on for a pick that's as good, if not better, than the one we spent in the first place. But then if you're going to use that pick to try and replace the guy and just swing and miss on it, that feels like it stinks. Like, use that pick in a different way. Use it some other way than trying to shoehorn a guy that has to now come in and replace one of the best players in the league. Like when the Vikings trade away Randy Moss and use the pick to replace him on Troy Williamson. It's like, no, don't do that. Use the pick on literally anything else, not the replacement for Randy Moss.
That's what the Ravens did this year. They traded Marquise Brown and used their first. Then I think they traded down a couple more times, but the essential replacement was Tyler Linderbaum, right? They went center.
Right.
Instead.
So just use it on like best player available. Don't use it on the guy that has to come in and try and replace a legend.
Yeah, so if that pick was forced because of need, that is where it does become an issue. But I mean, if you draft a receiver, I don't care. Draft all the receivers you want.
Unless it's Troy Williamson.
Don't draft
Troy
Williamson. So interior defensive line for the Niners as their biggest need. And I still agree with their DeForest Buckner trade. Last team, NFC West here, Seattle Seahawks. Let me know if I missed anybody. And if you do, I can't see it because I'm in the air. Seattle Seahawks, we're going defensive line here as the biggest need for the Seahawks.
Yeah, I mean, obviously if they don't re-sign Geno Smith, it's quarterback, but we'll know about that once we get to free agency. I kind of assume they're going to keep him around. The only question really is what the contract looks like or what the, whether they franchise tag him or however it works. But I would assume they're going to keep Geno. I think they could still, as is always the case in Seattle, use some offensive line reinforcements. But, yeah, defensive line was basically Uchenna Nwosu, not much else. Like, okay, you got...
And he's their hybrid, edge, outside backer, old school outside backer type.
You got some flashes from Shelby Harris, who they got as part of the Russell Wilson trade. Poona Ford, I don't think, had a good season. I think they would have been expecting more from him.
Darrell Taylor was a good pass rusher, solid pass rusher. He had a couple strip sacks in there, but very inconsistent, especially against the run.
And Bruce Irvin comes back as like a part of the rotation. Like when you're sending up the bat signal for Bruce Irvin, things have not gone tremendously well on the defensive line.
Look, I'll say Seattle's situation this year versus last year, I feel like they accelerated their rebuild, and it wasn't really a rebuild. It was kind of like with the Eagles, right? It felt like it should have been a rebuild, and then they made the playoffs, much like the Eagles did a year ago at this time, which means Seattle's a Super Bowl team next year, Sam. Yeah. But the Eagles 2 years ago felt like they were rebuilding. I thought Seattle coming into this year felt like they were rebuilding, and then they hit on so many draft picks, shored up the offensive line at tackle for the most part, bring in Tariq Woolen, all that fun stuff. But they haven't brought in impact players on the defensive line in a while, which is why they're the team. As soon as they sign Geno Smith, every mock draft is like, Will Anderson or Jalen Carter? Will Anderson, are they taking edge? Will Anderson, are they taking interior defensive lineman Jalen Carter from Georgia? Whichever one's available. One of those guys feels very much pegged for Seattle. The most interesting thing, I say fascinating and interesting a lot, but the thing I want to see here is predicting Seattle's drafts over the last 10 years, one of the most difficult things to do. And we haven't seen Seattle pick. We saw him pick number 9 last year with Charles Cross. I probably said the same thing last year. Predict what Seattle's going to do. Even in the top 10, what are they going to do at 4? Maybe it's not a Jalen Carter or Will Anderson, but it does feel like – 5. Defensive line is going to be the spot that they're going.
Right. I don't know if either of those guys will make it to 5. I guess it depends what the quarterback thing looks like in the first few picks. But it is kind of like, does the team that brought you LJ Collier covet a Will Anderson? we wanted this as our answer to an edge rush situation a few years ago. Do you see the thing the same way? Do you buy into the idea that Will Anderson is as good as everyone else thinks he does? Or are you going to go for, something completely out of left field as your top 5 solution?
I mean, I think Anderson can do anything. Be his, hand in the dirt, stand up. But sometimes those are I don't think he can play with his hand in the dirt. I don't think he's not my 270-pound edge that I like. I don't know. I'm not saying Seattle specifically, but people do look at Cleveland Farrell went number 4 overall when he was our number 5 edge on the board, and I think that was
culture.
It was a culture pick.
Yeah,
it didn't work.
You have to get the locker room, in shape before you found players.
Right. It didn't work. Didn't work for that pick. So yeah, Seattle's biggest need. We're going defensive line. Look at that. Is that the entire NFC?
Hopefully.
Should be. So we're going to we'll do the AFC on Radio Row.
Yeah, I think
one of these days. Mm-hmm. So we'll hit the AFC this week sometime. No promises as to when. We're going to have a million interviews. Who knows with whom? We'll be doing interviews with all sorts of people.
Yeah.
And we'll be everywhere. It's going to be great. It's going to be a lot of fun.
And we've discovered since the Ireland-France Six Nations game is on at 7:15 in the morning Mountain Time, we're probably not going to go to a bar for it. We'll probably watch it on, the TV.
Yeah. New school.
Peacock.
We'll stream
I
it.
think is what it streams in.
Mike Tirico's probably on the call.
No.
He calls everything.
Yeah, I don't know. They it's like one of those things where you get the foreign broadcast and you just pay for the stream.
Oh, I got you.
Ryle Nugent.
No. Is he like the Mike Tirico of...
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because when
say yes.
Mike's all over he does Sunday Night Football, he does the Masters and all. He's all over Peacock.
Yeah. It's not doing
U.S.
this.
Open. No. All right. Well, there we go. It's your NFC team needs. We got a plane to catch. Hopefully, we're landing right around now. Landing that plane in Arizona. Tonight's what do they call it? Opening night now.
Yeah.
It's like the worst part. I haven't been to an open. Did you guys go to opening night last year?
No, we didn't get until after it, I think.
I haven't been to an opening night. This will be my third
Also, I think
Super
the
Bowl.
last one was somewhere absurd. Like, it was nowhere near the convention center. Like, Radio Row is in the convention center.
Let us know in the comments or the chat, who do you want us to talk to at opening night? Because
Yeah.
that's when you just run around all the players. There's thousands of media members there.
Right. And that's usually at the stadium or somewhere different.
Right. It's not we're going to be on Radio Row. Our hotel is in the vicinity. I won't tell anybody where our hotel is like you did.
And in LA, the stadium is nowhere near LA. So getting, from Radio Row to the stadium was a giant pain in the hoop.
Yeah.
I think it's easier in Arizona.
Well, it's going to be great. I'm looking forward to it. So thanks to everybody for tuning in to our NFC team needs. We'll have AFC later in the week, and we'll have 5 shows. 5 shows probably this week.
That's the theory.
That is what we're looking at here. All right. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. We'll see you again sometime this week, Super Bowl Tuesday.